Takes a moment. All right, we are live. Welcome to the first episode of what I'm calling now Between the Before and After, the stories that shape us. I have an incredible gentleman with me on this broadcast today, Nick Chontos, and he's got a heck of a life story. And you know what? The things that he went through, especially in his formative years, are part of the reason why he's doing what he's doing today. And so, without further ado, let's dive into Nick's story. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, thanks, bro. I appreciate you having me. It's an honor.
Yeah. So now you are a published author, which I have a copy of your book, and I've done. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I've started having to read through it, as well as a life coach with your company known as Apex Masculinity, and you're also a podcast host.
Yes, that's correct. Yep,
Yeah.
love it.
Awesome. But it wasn't always like this for you.
No, no, actually, if we go back to the beginning, like we were kind of discussing in our warm-up chat there was
Yeah.
a lot of child abuse and childhood trauma, and it almost feels weird even saying it, John, like I'm hurting my parents' feelings or I'm betraying them by even mentioning it. But when I look at the way that I raise my kids today, I cannot even fathom how my parents did some of the stuff that they did. I asked myself, like, how could you do that to another human being? But it was just me and my mom for the first few years. And then my mom met my stepfather when I was
Yeah.
4. And he came into the picture. And, he was a 70s hippie, I guess, if you had to classify him or whatever, but very tyrannical, very uncontrolled with his temper and his rage and his words. And I think the
Yeah.
words sometimes were even more damaging than the hands. And there was a lot of just demoralizing things that left you feeling, unloved, unvalued, unsupported, unbelonging, not a part of the family dynamic. And for a while, my mom was kind of pained by it. You could tell it bothered her, but eventually I became the black sheep, so to speak. And my
Okay.
mom kind of assumed that same role of just dumping all of her garbage onto me
Right.
too.
Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I got 2 half sisters with my stepfather
Yeah.
and 2 half sisters with my biological father as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where do you fall in terms of age with your
I'm the
siblings?
oldest.
You're the oldest,
Yes, sir.
and so you were the first one, and um, yeah. So did any of your other siblings that you're aware of suffer abuse similar to this, or was this, or were you just like the one that was on the receiving end of all of it because
Yeah.
you were male?
I don't know if it's because I was male or if I don't know if it's because I wasn't his, and maybe I was like an inconvenience to this new family that he was trying to build or whatever. But definitely, they did not receive, and I'm thankful that they didn't, any of the garbage that I had to go through.
Yeah, and and for anybody listening, I'm like, I guess we should have thrown up a bit of a trigger warning here because we are talking about some really, really difficult topics that maybe people might feel triggered to hear about. But I think it's also important to be able to tell these stories because this is also meant to be a story of hope, and there's definitely some hope at the end of the
Mhm.
story. But you have to go through some dark places to get there. So, how, if I could ask, how frequent were you on the receiving end of abuse? Was this like once a week? Was this a daily thing, multiple times a day, or what was this like?
No, I wouldn't say multiple times a day. Gosh, man, that's 30 some plus odd years ago. To try to quantify that in a time frame of how often would be difficult. But I remember them being epic. Like one
Yeah,
time, and I talk about it in the book, how even today, if someone walks up on me in a dark room while I'm sleeping, I come awake in a half lucid state and I don't know where I am and I don't know who's in the room with me. And I have these panic attacks where I start screaming and cussing and crying in an attempt to try to fully wake myself up. But, like I remember my mom throwing my stuff in a suitcase one time when I was like 8 years old and throwing me in the suitcase out on the porch. And, I remember my dad just, picking me up and throwing me, over the top bunk of my bunk bed and smacking the light off and then reaching up and smacking me in the face and sending me to school with a black eye. And, another time in particular, man, he was going through a divorce with my mom, and like back, I couldn't connect the dots then that all of that
Oh, yeah.
was just them venting their frustration at their botched, inadequate lives that they were going through and I became like a focal point for it. But I remember him like having one hand around my throat and the other hand was like holding an expensive vase, like brandishing it like that was the weapon of execution, coming down and screaming through seething teeth that I was hated and should be killed. And there were good moments. I mean, I can't lie and say like we never went camping or we never threw the football or whatever like that, so it wasn't like this constant thing. But when it would happen, brother, it was
Yeah.
traumatic for sure.
Well, no kidding, and that would be actually incredibly confusing as well. If there, I mean, and maybe he had a split personality or something that but to have moments like that are absolutely terrifying, and then to have these strange moments where, it seems like things are peaceful and maybe things are going to be different this time, and maybe now he's going to be nice to me or something like that, or, um,
Sure.
but I wonder if there was always like hanging over your head, like, it doesn't matter how nice it feels right now. I don't know when the next one's coming.
Yeah, no, there was always that let's be on edge. And, it's funny how a young child who would have no interest in something like this, but because of survival, immediately becomes an avid student of mannerism, body language, speech patterns, tone of voice, and situational awareness as a 7-year-old child.
No kidding.
Because the minute any of that changes, we go into survival mode. Like we're looking for another place to be. You know what I mean? So, yeah, definitely would keep a person on edge at not knowing if we're dealing with Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde at the moment, kind of a thing.
So then, you were obviously going to school at this time, and you were living in the state of Texas. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and you were going to school. Hey, thank you, Leon, for letting me know. Leon says my audio is very weak, so I'll try and make sure I speak a little more directly into the microphone here. Um, anyways, yeah. So you were going to school at the same time. Did you ever have to kind of explain that to anybody what was going on, like if you had bruises and things like that?
No, oddly enough, it was almost like you would think someone, excuse me, like a child advocate would see that and start asking questions, but there was never any of that. And I ended up going into like a special education class for kids that were like ADHD or highly rambunctious or just not put together in their brains right. And of course, looking back now, I can totally see that a lot of that trauma like really affected the wiring in my head.
No
And
kidding.
yeah, school was just as much of a nightmare as home was, really.
Yeah, and I don't know if if a lot of teachers wouldn't even know how fully to deal with something like this, let alone, and then maybe you're this unruly kid. Did you find yourself getting into fights as a kid? Were you kind of lashing out at other people in response to what had happened to you?
Actually, the fights were few and far between. There was a few of them, and I think why there weren't more of them, John, to be honest, is the demoralizing caused a
Right.
sense, a lack of self-confidence in myself to where I was afraid for any kind of confrontation. You know what I mean? But
Okay.
but every once in a while you find yourself in a situation where someone's just coming at you and it's do or die. It's time to go,
Right.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And yeah. So mhm.
Yeah. So the tragedy of all of this is that this is happening, at a time when your brain is going through all of these developmental stages, and it's, we know looking back, this is setting you up for some serious struggles going through adulthood as well because of the time in your life that it's happening to you.
Mhm.
Um, and so at a certain point in time, you started turning to drugs. And how old were you when that was happening?
12 years old. I remember being in junior high, and I had moved from one junior high school to another to follow that special education class that I was in, and I was starting mid-year. And I remember having such anxiety about going to school that first day because I was like the new kid. I had to walk into a class with people I didn't know. And I just remember getting to school, waiting for the bus to leave, and then just leaving the school. And back behind our junior high school, there was this huge canal. And I just said, I'm going to go hide out there and I'm not even going to go to school. Like I just did not have the courage to go to school that day. And while I was down there, there were some older kids, some seniors. So I was probably well, I guess it'd be middle school. So they were either eighth or ninth grade. I was like sixth or seventh, but there were some older kids down there, about three or four of them. And these were kids that grew up in projects, you know, definitely single parent homes, lower socioeconomic status, if you would. And they were
Right.
down
Yeah.
there smoking weed, you know, getting high. And I walked up on them. And if we can be really transparent, really honest, and not like pulling
Yeah. Yeah.
punches here, like El Paso, Texas is a like predominantly Hispanic town. So
Right.
like
Yeah.
white, like lanky, pimply faced white kids that look like Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Already have the deck stacked against them. You know what I mean? But I walked down there and they were these older cholo gangbangers, these like Hispanic gangster guys. And I
Right.
thought,
Yeah.
great, now what's gonna happen? You know what I mean? I'm down here in
Yeah.
this ditch, nobody can see, and these guys were actually cool with me, man. They're like, Wedo, come on over here, man. I went over there and they fired up a joint and I took a couple drags and I remember, John, instantly, no pain, no agony up here. Like I had altered my
Wow. Yeah.
reality to a place where I was not thinking about, worried about, concerned about home, school, image, any of that stuff. And I found a new friend.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And yeah, and not only that, you found like this place of acceptance, like which is
Yep.
really, so many things coming together to really set you up. So it started with weed. Was there more?
Not at that point, I would say, because right about that time is where I started um, going to juvie. So I had a couple knucklehead friends that were in that same special ed class with me for behavioral issues, and
Right. Yeah.
we ended up living in the same neighborhood, about maybe 12 blocks from each other, and we would hang out, go ride skateboards, and steal spray paint from my dad's shed, and go like spray paint, in the ditches and whatnot. And we started committing crimes and doing beer runs and stealing from stores, alcohol and different things like that. But we ended up going to juvenile and spent a lot of time there. So there really wasn't like serious blocks of time. So I really didn't get any of the harder stuff until after I had got out of the Texas Youth Corrections Institute, which is the Texas prison for juveniles. And that was about 16. And that's where some of the more harder drug usage, harder drugs came into play in my life.
So then, yeah, and I'm a bit curious about this. Going into sort of a youth correctional facility, is it anything like we see portrayed, in the media or anything like that? Is it, or is that very much like a glorified thing? Like, is it a rough place, or was it a rough place back then, or was there fairly strict order?
Yeah,
And
I think,
what did your parents think about it too? I guess.
well, the first time it's like, leave him in there so he can learn a lesson. And I'm like, thank you for leaving me in here because I don't want to go home. It was
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
like one of
Okay.
them deals. This is a good trade-off. But I learned a few things in that place. One, nobody was hitting me there. Nobody was yelling at me there. Nobody was like on edge, or, there was no reason to be fearful. And another thing I learned in that place was the one resounding commonality between every person in that place among all socioeconomic and racial lines was a toxic family structure, a
Right. Yeah.
lack, an apparent and conspicuous lack of positive masculine role model influence.
Right. So
Yeah.
one way or another, whether it was abuse or neglect, there was or just complete absenteeism in terms of fatherhood.
Yep.
All of these, because I guess if you're in a youth correctional facility, it's going to be like an all male facility. Obviously, there's not like mixed prisoners or anything like that.
Right.
So
That's correct. Yeah.
every one of them is lacking like any sort of strong male figure. Um, so how do you pass the days when you're in a juvenile correction center? What do you do?
Well, if you can imagine, maybe like an octagon, like a stop sign,
Hmm.
and that's the central guard station, and then there's hallways that come off of that. And so you're in a hallway, you're either in A wing or B wing or whatever, and there's 5 rooms on one side of that hallway, 5 rooms on another. They're all single man rooms. Anyway, they don't put people together or anything like that for liability issues for that age group. But you get up in the morning, you come outside and eat breakfast. They turn the TV on and throw a couple decks of cards out on the tables, and that's your life. You know what I mean? If you're lucky, you get to go to the gymnasium once or twice a week for an hour to play some basketball or whatever. But basically, tell stories and watch TV and play cards.
Right. So was there any kind of education taking place as well, or?
Not in the juvenile detention center. That's kind of where you're just waiting to be tried or charged with your
Right.
crime.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
once,
Yeah.
but if you're talking about actually going to the Texas Youth Corrections, or Texas Youth Corrections prison, yeah, things change there. There's classes, there's weekly meetings, there's little huddles where we get around in a circle and talk about our problems. And they did actually help me get my GED there. But you can imagine the level of pride that is going on in that place when they do a group intervention thing. Like everybody's like, whatever, what's this, we
Right.
don't
Right.
have
Yeah.
time for
Yeah.
this, because we can't be transparent and vulnerable at that age. We got to be machismo and
Oh,
like
totally. Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean. So yeah, but no, I remember being in some riots and watching 30 very angry young men like attack guards and flip tables and throw televisions and break windows. And that was an eye-opening experience. Like the prison system in America is not for rehabilitation.
Right. Yeah. You were witnessing like the rage of like broken, angry young men,
Yes, yes, in
and
real time.
it had to boil over at some point. Did you feel like an outside observer, or did you end up participating in this stuff, or what was happening there?
That, like, I'll be honest with you, man. Like, I had a lot of pent up rage myself, and never wanted to like start an issue like that. But once it kicks off and it's already going, like the riot just pulls you in. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
There's group energy there, man.
it kind of felt nice to flip a table and be stupid for a little bit, as a 16-year-old kid. But yeah, so
Yeah. And so you're kind of in and out of this sort of juvenile correction path, I guess, for 12 to till you're 17, I guess.
right.
And somewhere in there you managed to get some kind of education. Do you have like much contact with your parents during this time, or like when you're in and out? Like, do your parents come to visit you when you're in there, or what was that like?
No, 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 no. Yeah, especially the Texas Youth Correction Facility was in Brownsville, Texas, or Brownwood, Texas. So I mean, Texas is huge. Like,
Yeah.
it's so it would have been like 2 days drive to get there. But no, they never came and saw me when I was in juvie. One time, I remember I was in a 6 month lockdown facility in El Paso called Crossroads. And I was just so broken, man. Like I was one of two white kids in there and getting picked on all the time. And, like the staff members, there was no help there. Like everything at home sucked, like everything. And I remember cutting my wrists. And my dad, he came and saw me, man, and like he wanted to see the wounds. And I think he felt bad. I'd like to think that he felt bad about my situation, but it was a 15-minute visit, and I didn't see him again
Right.
for
Yeah.
months and months and months.
And to clarify, when you say your dad, are you referring to your stepdad or your biological father?
Right, my stepfather. So my
Yeah.
biological
Yeah.
father is not even in the picture until like I get into my 20s, and I ended up like wanting to track him down, but he was like a former meth addict and ended up like just basically smoking himself to lung cancer and dying in his 40s, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any reciprocation from that path either. But yeah, I mean, my stepdad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So at some point, there was like there was an element of humanity to your stepfather. He wasn't just like entirely a monster, but he had all of these. And you can probably look back now and maybe reflect on it and realize that he had all of this. He was a tortured individual,
hmm
and he
Yeah.
was.
No, I believe that. I believe that because, like, especially as you get older, that's when you start realizing, damn, I haven't been the best person. But
Yeah.
even today, though, John, like, I would forgive and move on and patch up in a heartbeat. But it just doesn't seem like there's any desire on that end to
Hmm.
entertain or maintain a relationship. And I'm getting to the point now in my life where I've got my own wife. I got my own kids. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
I don't want to beg anybody for their time. I don't want to beg anybody for their love. But there are still days, even today, John, where I wish I had that. I wish I would have had it. And I wish I had it
Right.
today. A healthy, vibrant relationship with a father that doesn't have to be perfect, but it's there. You can go to them and get counseling, get mentorship, have a friendship with your father,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. And it's gone. And I've never, ever had that. And, I tell my wife this, and I touch on it in the book, that I'm the best thing I can do out of that situation is leverage that tragedy of a toxic relationship with my father and use it as fuel to launch me into being, or attempting to being, the best father that I can be today. You know?
Absolutely. Like trying to break the cycle and not repeat the things that you lived through. And so
Yeah,
if we
that's it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no go
Please.
for it, man.
No, I was just going to say that is a chore in itself too, because you know what you don't want to be, right? You don't want to be the
Right. Yeah.
heavy-handed abusive guy. So like I find myself leaning way heavy these days of being way overly gracious. And every once in a while I'm like, if I would have said to my parents what you just said to me, I'd be looking for my teeth on the ground right now. And all
Right.
you
Yeah.
got was a day off from your Nintendo Switch, or whatever, and I'm like,
Right. Yeah.
trying not to err on either side too much, is a learning process, because you want there to be boundaries and rules and respect and all that. But at the same time, you do not want to break a child, because they will
Yeah.
carry
Yeah.
that brokenness into their adult life. And if it's badly broken, John, they will be a hot mess and waste so many years and opportunities.
Yeah, and that's quite profound that you share that. I mean, of course, I'm just very early into my journey of fatherhood. My
Mhm.
son is just 8 months old, but I think so seriously about healthy masculinity and
Right.
wanting to be a healthy masculine role model for him as well. And we're definitely going to dive into that here. But there's
Mhm.
sort of one more section I want to chat about here in your past before we dive into
Okay.
kind of what you're doing here. And that
Absolutely.
is,
Let's do it.
so you end up going to prison, adult prison as you called it, at
Yes,
18
sir.
years old. You know,
Right.
what led you to that? So you've been in and out of juvie. It probably didn't. The idea was it's supposed to somehow lead you to being corrected or something like that, or getting you on the straight and narrow, but it didn't seem to
Right.
work.
Right. So I'll try not to chase the rabbit trail. I'll try to condense the story. But
Yeah,
when I
yeah,
got out of the juvenile prison, they gave me my GED. It was one of them deals where they're like pancakes at McDonald's. Like they're just giving them away. They're like, these kids are never going to make any things of themselves. So here's a GED diploma. You don't have to
right.
finish high school anymore. So I got out at 16 and didn't have to go to school anymore. So I ended up getting a
Okay,
job. Yeah, I ended
right.
up getting
Yeah,
a job at one of the local burger shops in town. And it was so cool. All my friends were still in school, you know what I mean? And I'm flipping burgers, making money and this, that, and the other. And I, I wasn't living right. I was still
yeah.
smoking weed and drinking and stuff. But one night, this guy came through the drive-through, because it was a 24-hour burger joint, if you will.
Hmm.
And it was 2 a.m. and the bar crowd closes at 2 a.m. and they start looking for food. So this guy comes through the drive-through, and he orders his food. He pulls up. He was in this old beater, like painted bright orange truck, and he had two ladies with him in the truck, and he was Mr. GQ. You could tell, right? He was the bar guy.
Yeah, yeah.
And he leans in through the window and he's like drunk, and he's like, "Bro, I don't have any money for the food, but can I trade you some cocaine for my food?" And I had never tried cocaine before, and I'm a 16-year-old kid, and I'm like, "Yeah, we can make that happen, bro." So like that,
Wow.
started. I got his number. I met him. Like I started buying massive quantities of cocaine from this guy, because obviously I'm working and I can.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I'm dealing coke at 16, and I take it home and I've got this big mirror and I'm weighing out, bags and this, that, and the other. And the dirty little secret with those drugs, John, is that they're fun for a season, but a hook quickly gets set.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're not selling your drugs anymore. You're using them. And before too long, you're not selling, and you don't have money, and you're stealing now to get them, and you're doing things that you never would have thought you've done to get them. And one drug addiction turns into another, and before you know it, you are completely bound and fettered in chains. And what started seemingly innocent ended up being a terrible, tragic curse upon my life that ended up leading me to adult prison. And at 18, and it was I don't know if it was a pity thing or what it was, but they have this program where your first time they'll give you 6 months. All right, we're going to
Right.
send you
Yeah.
there for
Yeah.
6 months. They call it shock therapy, is what they call it. So
Yeah.
you go there for 6 months, and boy, I tell you what, it was an eye opener for sure. I mean, it was an eye opener, and I got out. And there would be these moments, John, during all of this, even as an adolescent youth, where I would be like,
Yeah.
why am I doing this? And I would want to change. But I was so entrenched in this self-loathing from what I went through with my family situation. Now you compile the addictions on top of that, and now I'm in this place so deep, stuck so deep, that even though I want to change and want to get out, it's very difficult. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was the first run in prison.
So you're dealing coke at 16, and were you living
Correct.
back at home again at this time?
Yeah, I was at my parents' house at that time.
They never found out. Well, I
They
guess they
didn't
would have.
care. No, they didn't care. And this is another thing where, like, why, like, how could you do that? You know, but like my dad walked in the room one time and I had a half ounce of coke on a mirror, and he walked in and he looked and he just shook his head and closed the door and walked out. But I tell people jokingly, I had one of those families where I could be in the garage with my friends smoking crack and not get in any trouble. But if the dishes weren't done when my mom got home, I was in trouble. You know what I mean? Kind of, I say that tongue in jest, but like, yeah, it was a weird family situation for sure. But my dad used drugs, not as bad as I was, but it's almost like, how can you judge, when you went through that same thing, kind of a deal? I don't know, but definitely not a good parenting strategy for sure.
So you get picked up and you're sent to, as you call it, adult prison here in Texas. Was that for drug dealing, or was that for stealing, or what was that sentence for?
No, that sentence was actually the culmination of what do they call that? A domestic issue between my father and I, where some rules were laid out and they weren't followed. So I'm kicking you out at 16. Best of luck to you. And the next day, in my anger, even though I was completely at fault, so to speak, in what I had done, I broke back into their house, stole a bunch of stuff, stereos, TVs, different things like that, and ended up going to the pawn shop with him to sell them, to try to get money for drugs. And he pressed charges. So I actually picked up a breaking and entering charge at 17. This happened at 17. And in Texas, you're an adult at 17. So here I'm going to county at 17.
And so then, and I guess probably this isn't the hardest of the hard prisons. This isn't like a supermax facility, but again, is this anything like we see portrayed in the media, or how did you, because now I guess you've been in and out of the juvenile correction facility or system,
right? Yeah.
Now you're going to real prison, but you're 17 years old. What's running through your head?
Oh man, I tell you what, again, another love-hate relationship, because people that are angry like to hurt people. And at the original county jail in El Paso, there were no guards and no cameras like that had visibility to the cells. And I remember getting punched on and stomped on and taken advantage of. And again, I was just a scrawny little white kid, but I also remember times where these gangbangers would come into my cell, and it was very clear that it was fixing to get violent. And I would ask them individually. I remember this one time in particular, 6 guys rolled into my cell, and one of them started talking to me, and I knew where this was going. I could tell the body language. And I asked him, I said, man, what gang are you from? And he tells me, I'm with Southside Locos. And I said, oh man, do you know Shorty? Because I had done time with Shorty when I was a juvenile. And he's like, yeah, he's one of our veterans. I'm like, yeah, I did time with that guy, man, when I was a kid. And then I asked the guy next to him, hey, what gang are you in, bro? He said, I'm with Nasty Boys. And I'm like, oh man, Peloton? And he's like, yeah. And I said, man, I did time with that guy when I was a juvie. And by the stroke of luck, John, I knew one person from every gang that each of those 6 guys were in. And when we were done, they all looked at each other like, oh, I guess this white boy's cool, and they ended up just turning around and walking out. So it was like one of the deals where my past kind of saved me at that point. But prison, I'm telling you what, man, you leave county jail handcuffed to another guy. And that's a deterrent. Yeah. That's a deterrent for running away. So like the Fugitive movie with Harrison Ford, that's real.
Right. Yeah.
You get handcuffed to another guy, and that bus ride from El Paso to the prison in Abilene, Texas, is like a 10-hour drive. And if you got to use the bathroom, that guy's got to walk with you down the aisle of the bus and go to a urinal on the bus. And he's basically holding your hand while you use the bathroom. You know what I mean? And then when you get to the prison, you come off, and it's not like military where guys are screaming at you, but I mean, it's very clear you get inside this building, the cuffs come off, your clothes come off, you're standing there naked as the day you were born with 80 other guys that have come in on buses from all over Texas. They throw delousing powder on you to kill the lice. They take razors to your head. They shave. I mean, it's very what's the word I'm looking for? Intrusive, so to speak, you know. And then you got to see a psychologist and you got to see a therapist, and they're trying to figure out, you know, what are your charges? Are you violent offender? Are you sexually insane? Are you a repeat offender? You know, what all these different things. And based on all that information, they decide which of the 112 prisons in Texas they're going to send you to do the remainder of your time. So
Okay.
me just being like a petty, it was a class C burglary charge. I ended up going to a minimum security unit, but my one of my good friends ended up going to a medium security unit. And right at that time, there had been a prison gang that started up that was from El Paso. So it was basically understood that when you got to any unit, if you were from El Paso, it was do or die. Like you were going to fight, you know what I mean? And I got into a couple scuffles. I tried to keep myself real low key. I had kind of learned how to walk that life because of all the years of being in and out as a juvenile. You don't carry yourself as an arrogant man because no one likes that, but you don't carry yourself as a weak and timid man and make yourself a predator or a prey for predator. You know, you just kind of walk a middle road. You know, don't look anybody in the eye, but at the same time, you know, you don't keep your head down like you're like some loathsome person. But the time passed, and I got out after the 6 months and ended up falling into prison again the second time because I didn't complete the parole, so to speak. I violated it. So here I am going back the second time. My son had just been born and he had just started learning how to laugh. And I remember being so happy and thinking, you know what, like I gotta get my act together, even though I have these warrants for my arrest and I'm kind of on the run. And I know like at some point I'm going to have to answer for this. Like I need to be here. And I really enjoyed the fact that I was a father. And as fate would have it, I got pulled over for having mud on my license plate. And they said it's an obscured plate. And wow. they ended up figuring out who I was. And here I am going to prison for the second time. And it was at that moment I was like, something has to change. Like I cannot live the rest of my life like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
yeah, and I'm kind of curious. You know, with the in and outs in the prison systems you went through, did you meet other people who other men, young men who were kind of the same way? They're like they felt stuck. Like I don't want to do this, but I don't know any other way.
Yeah, no, the dangerous thing with that is there were a couple of guys in there. You'd hear it in their tone of voice and some of the things they'd say where they were like fed up with the fact that they were stuck in this cyclical pattern of in and out, right? But the dangerous part was the guys that you would meet that had become accustomed to it and had accepted it. Like, this is the normal for me, and I'm not even going to try to change myself. Like I will be this person for the rest of my life, and I may as well just accept it. And for me, I was like, I had this much, John, left in me to say, I cannot resign myself to this life. And man, I started going to like jailhouse church meetings, started hanging out with more positive people. Like my entire life, John, this is to tell you how toxic I was. And like how down at the bottom I was from the first time I went to juvie and started learning about prison gangs and prison life. All my life, all I ever wanted to be was in the Aryan Brotherhood. Because when you are a toxic person and you come from a family where there's no love, no support, no validation, and no acceptance, those are human needs. We need those things as people to live, to thrive, to survive. And the one thing that would happen, and I'd do time with these kids and then they'd go home and I'd go home and I wouldn't see them again, but we would form these bonds. Even though we were broken, toxic people, there was acceptance and what appeared to be love and support because we're all in this together and I got your back and you got my back, and you form these bonds with people. And for me, the Aryan Brotherhood was like the ultimate piece de resistance. Like you arrive at this well-respected prison group of men that are in charge, and they got it under control, and you finally get to the place of respect, and you have your tribe, so to speak. And I remember after having that wake up moment and just wanting to do my time and get out, and I was going to like I said, those church meetings. I was reading a lot of books. I was trying to sort through some things on my own, basically. And the Aryan Brotherhood came up to me, and they're like, listen, man, we've been watching you, and we like the way you carry yourself, and we want to put you down. Like, that means we want you to join the family, basically,
Right. Yeah.
And I remember that moment, everything slowed down, and I thought to myself, this is what you've wanted your whole life, and now here you are trying to change your life, and look what shows up. And it was a hard
Wow.
choice. Yeah, it was one of those moments where it would have been so easy, because all the other white guys, because if we can be transparent
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
honest,
Absolutely.
white folks in prisons are usually the minority. And
Right.
that's because of socioeconomic stuff that, we can go on a deep rabbit trail on all that. But anyway, like, you're alone without a family in there. And I thought, man, these guys would have my back. I would have their back. Nobody would mess with me. It'd be safer, like this, that, and the other. I'd be around a brotherhood of men that I had commonality with. And I stopped and I said, no, courage is doing the right thing, even when it hurts and you don't want to. And that's
Yeah.
hard, John. It's hard because it's a daily thing. It's not even today. It's not even so much that moment in prison. It's today. Every day we have to have the courage to do the next right thing, even though it's hard or we don't want to. But anyway, I made the choice I told him, look, man, I respect and thank you for the offer. It means a lot to me because I know what it means, but I've chosen a different path, and I'm going to stay on that path. And the guy looked at me and he goes, all right, well, just so you know, we respect you. And if anything happens, we got your back. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? I'll run independent, but I got you guys' backs too, because it's a different world in there, John. And you have to
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
that. But I got out of prison, bro, and it wasn't jailhouse religion. It was real, like a trajectory for like really trying to reform my life had started. And started going to church. And that's what worked for me. I know that's not for
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody, but it's what worked for me, being around a new network of people that had different plans and ambitions for themselves, right? And I met my wife, and we got married 2 years later and started a family. And that's how things traject. Now, I don't want to like jump ahead on stuff. If you've got like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
pre-planned questionnaire, like how we're going, like I want it to
I don't,
format
man.
good.
No, I
Yeah,
mean, this is awesome, but it also speaks to because if someone goes to say something AA or some kind of group where they're trying to overcome addiction, very often they point to you need a higher power in your life, and there's something
yeah,
to that,
yeah,
and both you and I are Christians, and I think we both kind of go about it quietly, but there's something about having a belief in a higher power and that gives you a strength that you might not otherwise be able to find or have.
yeah,
And so you're and really in one sense it's like you've now got to this point in your life, you've broken the cycle. You've got a wife, you've got a couple of kids. um in I was kind of curious because you mentioned having a son, and are you still in contact with the mother? What's kind of happening there?
yeah. So yeah, I actually was just texting her the other day because my son with her, because obviously the woman I'm married to now is not that same woman, right? We
Yes,
kind
yeah.
of both went different directions, but his name is Mordecai. I love him to death. He's pushing 18. No, he is 18. And
Yeah.
he's definitely not going down the same path that I went, but he's skirting the line, and he's really hard to get a hold of. So I got his number, and I'll text him, and I got to pound and pound and pound on him. And then he'll finally call me and reach out and stuff like that. But we communicate, and, I did my child support and all that stuff, and was faithful with that. And when we lived in Colorado before we came up here, like I'd have him on the weekends, and I was definitely a part of his life. Like he had a room at our
Yeah.
house and everything like that. But she ended up moving to Wyoming one time, and we moved to Texas so I could kind of start my career in the oil field. And like it turned into summers and Christmas rather than every week kind of a thing. But yeah, no, I love him tremendously, and I have high hopes for all my kids. And the real kicker for when your kids are not doing well that I'm learning is you have to have perspective. As a father, it's good to go, okay, at least they weren't doing what, because I was shooting dope at 17, right? And
Right. Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
nowhere
Yeah.
near that. You know what I mean? And in and out of prison. But you have to understand that if you build this pain-free, tragedy-free, picture-perfect life for your kids. It's like how they say when a chicken's coming out of an egg, if you help it come out, it'll die. It
Right.
has
Yeah.
to fight to get out. And once it does, it's vibrant, healthy, and thriving. And I don't want to protect my son from having to go through like some hiccups in life, because I know he's learning, like, all right, this works, this doesn't work, and this is where I need help, and this is where I'm doing well. And I want to be a support for him and for anybody, but I don't get too hung up on the fact that, it's so easy to try to live through them vicariously, because
Yeah.
I'm 43 now and I've learned all of this stuff on personal growth and development. And I want this 18-year-old kid to live what I live today, right? But it took me going through 40 years to
Yeah.
get to where I'm at today. So I got to keep all that in perspective and stuff. And just before we jump off the prison thing, I
Yep.
wanted to tell you just real quick. I remember when they called my name on the intercom. Some prisons is just 2 men in a cell. The minimum security ones, they'll stuff 58 guys in a cell, and it's a big cell, obviously.
Well, yeah.
And
It's
you
just like
have
a giant
friends.
dorm.
Yeah, basically that's what it is. And they do that on purpose because they know everybody has short time. They're not trying to fight. They just want to get out so they can like trust having numbers and capacity like that. But still saw some crazy riots with guys fighting. But anyway, I remember when they called my name on the intercom, they're like, Chontos, pack it up. You're heading home, right? And there's that moment where everything you own, you give away because you're fixing to get out and hit a real cheeseburger and catch a ride home and see your loved ones, right? So you give all your commissary away, you give all your stationery away, you give any books you have, you give everything away to your guys. And there's a hug, and you fold up all your laundry and your sheets, you drop it off, and you take off. And I remember, John, being terrified. Now, that's usually a day for people to rejoice, right? I'm getting out.
You get
But
out.
for
Yeah.
me, I knew what I was going back to, like all the stuff that we're protected by with the walls of the prison. And I know there's drugs in there, here and there, and whatnot, but I mean, actually living in El Paso, one of the most narcotic diluted cities in America, cheap drugs and a whole host of variety of drugs. And I had no network. I had no foundation there. I had a little bit in me started, but I was going back to an environment that was so polluted. I was like, man, I do not want to go back and fall again. And I remember being terrified, but there was grace with me. And I got out and I went on my way, and they put 30 of us on the bus to go, because it's weird. You can live in El Paso, be at a prison in El Paso, and when you get released, they send you on a bus to Huntsville, which is a day and a half away, release you from there, and you catch a Greyhound bus back to El Paso. It's like a complete waste of taxpayer money. They should have just opened the doors there, right? But so 30 of us get on this bus, and we're driving to Huntsville to catch the Greyhound home. And we stop halfway because it's a shift change for the guards. So we stop at a maximum security prison. Now, they never put guys getting released into a maximum security prison in general population with the other convicts. Because when guys find out that have, 2 or 3 life sentences stacked on top of each other, that you're getting out. No, you're not getting out. Right. And, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
So they put them in administrative segregation. So there was 29 available beds in administrative segregation. There was 30 of us on the bus. I'm the last guy getting off the bus. And guess where I got to go? Into general population. And I'm sitting at a stainless steel table. And these 3 white boys come and sit next to me. Remember, prison is very kind of racially diversified. It's just cultural things separate people that way.
It's how it is. Yep.
And they sit down and they start talking to me, and I'm like, they're kind of asking me questions, about what I'm all about. And I just honest, I said, look, guys, I'm catching the bus home. Like, there was no more beds in AdSeg, and this is where I'm at. And the guy's like, man, you ain't been around. And I'm like, no, I've been around, man. I've been to prison twice. I'm this, that, and the other. And I remember this huge white boy was like 280 pounds of just ripped muscle. He leaned over and he ran his finger behind my ear like this. And he goes, nah, you don't know nothing. You're still wet behind the ears. And it was like a very intrusive moment, you know? And like, I started talking to him, and the one guy just finished doing an 11-year sentence, was out for 6 months and came back with a 10-year. The other guy had 2 life sentences, and he couldn't start the second one until he finished the first, kind of a thing, you know? And
Wow. Yeah.
I think that higher power was telling me, look, this is where you're headed next. Like, I'm giving you a glimpse into where your life is going if you come back to this place. And I was like, man, I do not want to be here. Like, I do not want any more of this. You know, it's just, I just thought you'd get a kick out of that story. You know, it's
Yeah.
like,
No, that's powerful. But you managed to survive the night, obviously.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. One eye
Yeah.
open, right?
Yeah, no kidding, man.
Mm.
But that's quite a story, and there's something about seeing that and just the contrast between what it is that you want. So at this point, how you're leaving prison, you're out for good, as far as you know at this point in time.
Yep.
You're how old? You're 22 at this point,
Yeah,
23.
23, 24, actually, somewhere around there.
Okay, and now where are you heading? Because do you have somewhere to live? I mean,
Right. Okay. So they made a mistake because the 6 months prior to getting out, I had tried to set up this parole transfer because my mom and dad had got separated 2 weeks before I got released from prison. And they were both okay. You know, you can come back home and start over again here in Colorado. They moved from Texas back to Colorado, which is where my mom is from.
okay, yeah.
So nobody in my family lives in El Paso, Texas anymore. I'm getting released. I'm trying to get my parole transferred to Colorado so I have a place to go. And they mess up and send me to a halfway house in El Paso. And I'm panicking because the parole officer in Colorado is waiting for me to check in. And if I don't within 24 hours, I'm violated and I'm going back to prison, right? So I had this huge, like, strategic mess that I had to work out. But it all ended up getting worked out. And I was on a bus back to Colorado, and I moved in with my mom, and it was good, man. Like, I was more toned down. I had learned a few things. I was working, so I was helping her, and we were kind of support for each other there for a while. And I ended up, you know, getting a job. And listen, John, like, this is trivial for people, right? But when you're coming out of almost 10 years of drugs and incarceration, and you've made a change and you're ready to go, you have to relearn how to be a father, a husband, an employee, hold a job, manage your money, stay sober, deal with stress, like, from scratch. Like, stuff that should have been taught in your youth and adolescence, you are now learning as an adult man. So there was this period of time where I'm like taking out high interest credit card loans because I've been out 6 months and I'm getting credit card offers now. And wow, like, I'm somebody now. I'm getting credit card offers, you know, and made that mistake. And, you know, got the wrong job and got into an argument with an employee and got fired because I was still a convict in my mind, you know, and I lost that job. Okay, that didn't work. I don't want to do that again, you know. And so you're learning all these lessons as you go through life to try to get to square one, basically, so to speak.
Yeah, now you're starting from like a deficit. And when you're looking for a job, did you have to publicly disclose that I have a criminal record?
It's on the application. They'll ask if you've ever, and some of them are. A lot of these, like, minimum wage, you know, flip burgers at Wendy's or come work at a mulch factory, they don't even ask. They don't care.
Right, yeah.
But there was a few jobs where I had to, and there were times when I would just leave it blank. And I would make them ask me, why is this blank? And more often than not, nobody would even ask. But there was a few times, because I had a little bit of parole that I had to do after that. And I would have to disclose that. I'd be like, listen, man, I'm on parole. I need to leave early on Wednesday so I can go see my parole officer, you know. And for construction stuff and oil field stuff, it's almost like par for the course. That rough, tumble, kind of masculine, you know, like, okay, like, we did stuff when we were kids too. We just didn't get caught. Like, we'll give you grace, kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
It didn't hinder me for anything that I needed to do. I didn't have a degree. I wasn't trying to get a job as a nurse or mortgage lending or anything like that where you would need to disclose something like that. So.
Right. Yeah. Yes, you're able to kind of get your life back on track. And from the time that you got out of prison, how long was it until you met your now wife?
Right. So I think 6 months. She was going to college in a neighboring town, and her parents went to this church that I had been going to, and I knew them. And she would come back for like spring break, Christmas, summer, things like that. And I'd get to see her, and then she wouldn't be there anymore. And I'd be like, wow, that's weird. Where'd she go? And I found out she was going to college. But on one of her visits back, I had asked her if I could take her out for a date. And of course, I asked my pastor first, hey, what do you think about this girl? Should I pursue this? And he's like, I think it would be good, but you should ask her father, because that's the right way. That's not something you would have done 10 years ago. But if we're being true to this new trajectory that you're on, you should ask her dad. So I asked her dad, and he's like, yeah, that's totally fine. You can ask her, but a lot of guys have, and she's turned them all down. So I don't know what it was. I asked her for just one day, just come have dinner with me, and I made a complete fool of myself, John. Like, I had no social skills whatsoever. We sat down to this fine Italian cuisine, and right before we started eating, I'm like, I'm going to preach the gospel one day. I'm going to be a pastor, and I need a pastor's wife to be by my side. And she was like, okay, like, whoa.
Yeah.
But she said that she loved just listening to me talk, like, about just whatever, and I don't know. It's a God thing, bro. That's all I'm going to say, man. Like, I have no, like, looking back now, I'm like, I don't even know how I landed this woman. She's never drank, never smoked. She's never cussed. She stepped on the platform on our wedding night, pure as the wind-driven snow, took the purity ring off her finger, gave it to her father, kissed him on the cheek, and stepped up on the stage and became my bride. Again, pure as the wind-driven snow. And like, a lot of people don't get that. And if you didn't get that, it's not a big deal. I'm not saying like it had to be that way, but like, I got an amazing woman, and she works so hard, and she's an easy keeper. And for me, that's good, because I'm stupid sometimes.
Yeah. And obviously before you get married, she had, at some point, had become aware of your past.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I got to testify about it, so to speak, in a church setting, about this is where I was, and like, this is where I am now. And, grace can do amazing things in a person's life. But what got her, John, got her is, and she tells me, and she tells me today, my passion for the things of God at that point was so genuine and intense, like living a gospel-centered life.
Right. Yeah.
And she wanted that. She's like, if I ever marry a guy, he's got to be that, because if I'm going to have kids with that guy, I want my kids to grow up in that kind of a thing. You know what I mean? And we would be on a date, and I would see somebody holding a sign in the middle of the night, like on the side of the road. And I would literally pull the car over, tell her to wait in the car. And I would go to that person, and I'd hand them a track, and I'd sit and talk to them, tell them where I'd been, and God can change their life. And my wife would just, like, I'm on a date with my wife, like my soon-to-be wife. And I leave her in the car to go witness to somebody about how God can change their life, so to speak. You know what I mean? And she just saw intensity and genuine love for Christ. And that's kind of what saved me on all of my other faults, for real. But no, it's been good, man.
And so, part of between the before and after is, and you've done a really phenomenal job of telling your story, and I really appreciate your willingness to be open and share. Like, this has been fantastic. Because, man, I got tons of questions. I could keep this going. We're gonna wind down shortly here, but I do have a couple more things I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
Because people will see where you're at now. You've got Apex Masculinity, as well as you have a full-time job in the oil field, but you're also mentoring other like young men or troubled men, men who maybe didn't have a father figure in their lives, and so on. And so they see where you're at now, and you've made this powerful transformation in your life. And sometimes when we see that, we might get this idea that, like, everything's tickety-boo, or whatever expression you want to use. So what do you what's still a struggle for you? And is there, do you recognize maybe there's some deficits from early, like, childhood drug use kind of thing that are still potentially present there?
Yeah. So like you said, man, it's, the social media life can be presented in a way to we can make ourselves look any way. You know what I mean? I'm Mr. Apex Masculinity, and I've got it all boxed in and figured out. But there are definitely battles that rage on. Like I said, man, sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and I don't know where I am, and I'm wondering who's trying to kill me. There's moments where I get so bogged down in the monotony of life, and I feel, even though I have all of these like clearly defined successes, like file cabinet evidence successes with, being a homeowner, being married 14 years to a beautiful woman, having kids, making $30 an hour in the overtime with 40 after 40 hours, and we're doing like 70, and knowing how to run all this specialized equipment, and having a published book that helps men become better men, and having a podcast where I bring on experts that like talk about being a better person, and having a life coaching business. And you would think that there's never dark days, but it's not the case. And I don't know if I wish it wouldn't be the case, because I had to go through all of that to be where I am today. And some of that baggage lingers, like when I'm feeling purposeless, even though, like I said, I went over that list of accomplishments, but there are some days where I feel like I'm not having any impact, and when I get like that, for me, that's a trigger for me. I get in a place of despair or discouragement. And like we talked about earlier in the warm-up chat, the neural pathways of the brain that were created during the drug usage in my adolescence, my brain will never forget that. My brain
Right.
knows that the fastest way out of emotional turmoil is to put a sharp syringe in my arm full of methamphetamines. My brain will never forget that. My brain
Right.
knows that a stiff drink or whatever, or a wild off the map Pornhub evening to release dopamine levels in my brain will take away any pain that I have, because the dopamine basically alleviates that, right?
These are the hyper stimuli that exist in our modern society that maybe never existed before, and there is no like natural substitute for those things. When you look
Yeah.
in the brain of an addict, and it's like once an addict, always an addict, because as you said, these things happen at especially like a crucial developmental time in
Yep.
your life, and they're almost like
Yeah.
they're hardwired in your brain, and it's almost impossible not to. And so when you're facing struggles like this, how do you find your way out?
Gratitude is one. I have to be able to, as they say, count your blessings, like the old hymn goes, to stop and go over all of the good things that have gone on, the good things that are going on, the good things that are coming up in the future, because we all have dreams and plans. Also, gratitude for the things that happened in the past that were not so good, because I am now leveraging them to do a good work today. Also, taking extreme ownership of your own life, being
Yeah.
willing to say, all right, look, I could very easily go off the map, fall off the map, and go on a deep dive to a negative, dark place. But I am responsible as a man. I wear many different hats. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an employee, I have a mortgage, like I have a life coaching business, all these different things. And I have to take ownership of all of those and realize that if I go down that dark path, I'm going to fail those obligations that I have to be the best version of myself in every arena that I have as a man, right? Also, not giving myself over to comparison syndrome. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
these are
Absolutely.
outlined in the book. These are just a few. These like bullet points. But comparison syndrome, where we look at someone else and go, you know what, man, my life is good enough. I can relapse here, or I can relapse there, and still be okay, because at least I'm not like that guy over there who's like still in prison and still strung out on heroin. Like, no, you cannot compare yourself to someone else's life to
Yeah.
try to make you
Absolutely.
feel better about yourself and the relapses or the toxic decisions that you make today. Also, having realistic expectations are what helped me. I have to
Yeah.
be realistic and know, look, there are going to be dark days that come, and there's no way around it. Like, you cannot build a wall around your life to prevent yourself from trauma and tragedy, like even as an adult. And we try to do that, it seems like, in civilized society, where if I just make enough money, or if I just find the right person, or if I just do this, I can build this perfect little wall, this hedge around myself and my family, and there'll never be any trials or tribulations that come our way. And then you get that report from the doctor about your cancer issue, or that loved one
Yeah.
gets hit in a car accident and passes away, or something like that. And then you're not prepared. You have to be realistic and know that dark days are going to come, and it's okay when they come. It's
You
just
know,
how you handle it moving forward. Go ahead.
no, I think that's so powerful that you share that, because I obviously I operate in a slightly different arena, and maybe not to the same degree, helping people. But I work with people around weight loss, and of course,
Great.
I always say weight loss is the cover story, right? Because there's always so much more going on in somebody's life when they're carrying around excess weight.
Yeah.
But I think we paint this idea in our head that when I get to this point, whatever arbitrary point that is in the future, when I get to that point, my life is going to be easy. And
Yeah.
that just sets us up for disappointment, because it's like
Yep.
there is no point in life where it's going to get easy. What's going to
I
be
like it.
different, though, is you are going to be stronger and you are going to have better tools. You are now equipped to navigate what life throws at you. And in fact, I say I have never met a remarkable person who had an easy life. And so maybe we shouldn't be asking for life to be easy, but we
Right.
should be asking for the strength to navigate all the hardship that life will send our way. And that's how we become a remarkable person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good to also build yourself little windows where you get away from everything
Mm-hmm.
and have a moment where there's just peace and quiet, like a vacation where phones are off, stress is off, all that stuff. Get recharged, and just like Spartans, man, put that mask back on and let's get back to living life
Yeah.
and doing stuff, because the more success you want, it seems like the more obstacles you invite into your life to get that success. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, it's good stuff, man. I know we're running up against the clock. I don't want to go over, but I
Yeah.
really
And
appreciate you giving me the platform to share some of this stuff. Thank you.
absolutely, and Leon also commented, your story is awesome, Nick, and thank you, Leon, for sharing that. So maybe we'll finish up on this point around masculinity, because
Okay.
I'm quite passionate about this as well. I feel
Mhm.
like masculinity gets maybe in one sense we could say a deserved bad rap, but I
Right.
don't like that it gets a bad rap, because you've used this word toxic, and I understand that the term toxic masculinity that exists out there, and it exists for a reason because of male behavior that is toxic.
Yeah.
But very often I don't know that we have an alternative that's often presented to us, like what is positive masculinity, or in the case of what you're doing here, apex masculinity. And
Right.
so what does manhood and apex masculinity mean to you, and what is it you're trying to help men to become?
Right. And that's the key word that you used there when you said, what does it mean to you? Because I, in my research, have like read 16 different things from 16 different people on what toxic masculinity is. And it really goes back to whatever that person suffered. But what for me, apex masculinity is not about chauvinism and dominance. It's not about I'm the man and I want my dinner on the table at 6 and I don't care
Right.
about
Yeah.
anybody else's feelings and I'm not sensitive to anybody else. Apex masculinity is about taking full ownership of your traumatic past, leveraging it to build an amazing life. It's about taking full ownership of every obligation that you have as a man. If you're a father, work on being the best father that you can be. If you're a husband, learn how to know your wife and be sensitive to her. And it's not about she should just be grateful because I'm floating the bills and I make this great oil field money and therefore I
Right.
want my
Right.
socks folded a certain way and in the drawer a certain way. She has her own dreams and her own ambitions and her own aspirations and her own fears and her own, all of that stuff. And I need to partner with my wife and be a support for her just as she is for me. It's about being a better employee. If you're an employer, be good to your people. Like, don't just use them as tools to make you money, but invest in those people so that they can grow in their craft and their trade. If you're just an employee and you have new people come on, teach them things. Don't be like this us four and no more. If you want to learn this trade, you better keep your eyes open kind of thing. Take guys under your
Right. Yeah.
wing, show them how to work equipment, show them how to do the job. Be instant in season and out of season to like be a friend to people. And I know work is different than home and we're there to make money and we got to do a job, but you end up spending more time with your coworkers than you do with your family often. At least I do. And
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
relationships need to be forged. So husbandry, fatherhood, employer, it's about managing your money better and not being impulsive. It's about figuring out what your triggers for toxic choices are and mitigating those triggers as best as you can. It's like a whole package of learning yourself and value adding out unto other people as you grow and mature as a man. And that's what it is for me.
And I think you just highlighted on something really, really important here. It's like in order for you to be able to help other people, you had to go through these growth experiences yourself.
Yeah.
And this is what makes you authentic. Is that you didn't just read a book about this stuff, because I'm sure there's people out there that might occupy the life coaching sphere who have maybe read books about this stuff and so on. you've lived all of this and you've overcome it, and that allows you insight into men's experiences that other
Right.
people would have no idea what this is actually like. You have the lived experiences, and you live with the struggle daily, but you have the tools, you have the support, to and the strength really to get through all of this. And because of that, this is what has made you the man that you are today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I made a decision when I published the book that I was going to mail copies of that book every month to prisons, inpatient rehabs all across because it's in English, the English speaking world. So
Right,
I've
yeah.
been systematically mailing copies of the book out. I sent one to the UK last month. I sent one to Australia. I've sent out a bunch to prisons in the United States. And I joined a prison wives support group on Facebook, and the wives are already messaging me telling me their husband got the book and it is having great impact in their life, and I'm doing that at my cost. In the beginning I was like, all right, I made a book, maybe I can make a living out of this, and I realized, you know what, you're not Stephen King, you're not going to write 4 books a
Hmm.
year and make millions of
Yeah,
dollars,
yeah.
but why don't you focus on adding value, and then we'll worry later about the financial end of it. So I just mail them out, and the stuff I'm getting back that it's helping, it's humbling, bro. It's
Yeah.
humbling. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely incredible that you're doing this and having that kind of impact, and there's going to be definitely going to be a spillover effect from that, which is really powerful. So, I really want to thank you again for coming on to the show today, for being so open, for being so vulnerable, and also for giving people hope, because I think that's the other part of it. We want to tell compelling stories. We want to tell unfiltered stories in a sense, but we also want to give people hope. It's, we don't want to, in telling this story, we don't want to glorify the past that you had. That's not really the point, but really to say
Right.
that even from a past as difficult as you have had, you've been able to get to this point in your life. And
Yeah.
when we see those stories of hope, it gives us hope that whatever struggles that we're facing, that we have something within us, within the human spirit, that will allow us to rise above the struggles that we face.
Right. Absolutely. I like it, bro. Thanks for having me on, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll give you a chance for one last word of wisdom. If you were to condense a piece of wisdom into a nutshell you would like to share with the world, what would that be?
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And let's have an awesome week ahead. Take care, and we'll chat again